What's going on, guys? This is the Trank. Today we're going to be turning this old crosscut sled into a brand new crosscut sled with Rockler T-Track, so stick with me.
To get started on this project, I began by taking apart my old crosscut sled. The wood was all junk, but the aluminum bracing could be reused to make the new sled. I was also sure to save all the screws, as they were also good to use for the new one. With everything disassembled, I put it back on the table saw just to do some rough dimensioning and visualize what size I wanted the new sled to be. I knew I wanted it wider so that I could better support longer boards. With the sizing ready, I started by marking and cutting a 2x4 to start making the fence. With this new sled, I'm going to try using the Rockler T-Track system so that I can easily have an adjustable stop block. I also put aluminum bracing on all my fences. This helps keep the wood square and straight. I run the fence through the table saw to help get rid of the rounded corners. After this, I take a rough dimension of the width of the T-Track. I then lower the table saw blade to the height of the track so that it will sit flush with the top of the fence. I start by using a piece of scrap wood to make the rabbet for the T-Track. This way I don't mess up with the actual fence. When this is done, I take a quick check and I see that it's good to go. Now, using that rabbet, I reset the table saw to this width and start making repeated passes on the actual fence. A zero clearance fence should really be used here, but I just went as close as I could get it without it and knocked the rest off with a chisel. Next comes the important part of dealing with the fence. I take a long level and clamp it as tight as I can to the side of the fence to help keep the board straight. With the clamps on, I take the aluminum bracket and clamp it into place as well. I then pre-drill the holes and put in some pan head screws to keep it in place. Next, I mark the length of the track I need and cut it using a hacksaw. You could probably use the table saw and get away just fine, but I've never used it for cutting aluminum and I didn't feel like trying to do it that day. I then place the track into place and pre-drill and screw in the track along the fence. The Rockler T-Track system allows the screws to sit flush against the bottom so that things can slide freely. The next step is to cut the slides to go on the track and the table saw. I usually use MDF for this, but I had some scrap pine laying around, so I decided just to use that. I used a flimsy piece of brass here as a push stick, which probably wasn't the safest route. Then I cut a couple spacers using some 1/8 inch plywood. This will help with the glue up process in a minute. Using the plywood, I shim the slides up so that they sit evenly above the table. Be sure to lower your blade below the table at this step. I didn't, and I spent 5 minutes once the glue was on trying to figure out why the sled wouldn't sit evenly. I then placed the 1/2 inch MDF base and used the heaviest objects laying around me to apply a makeshift clamping pressure to the top. Once the glue was dry, I trimmed the sides flush using a flush cut saw. I didn't get it on camera, but be sure to clean up the glue spill out with a chisel as well so that it all slides smoothly along the track. Now it's time to mount the fence. Set the sled right on top of the blade, being sure to remove your riving knife first, and carefully raise the blade through the center of the sled. Next, clamp your fence along the edge of the sled and put in one screw that is offset from the center so that the blade doesn't hit it. This will act as a pivot screw that will allow us to perfectly square the blade to the fence. Using a square, carefully begin to square the fence to the blade. Take your time doing this, as this is the most important step of the build. Once you have it perfectly square, clamp it down in place and put in some evenly spaced screws. I decided not to use glue for this sled in case I ever need to take it apart and change anything in the future. These screws all need to be flush or below the bottom of the sled so that they don't hit along the table. I just used a bigger drill bit to act as a makeshift countersink. Finally, measure and cut another piece to be the backside fence. This doesn't have to be perfect, as it will only act as counterweight to the sled. Lastly, I cut a piece of scrap and put it right in the center. This acts as a safeguard to remember not to put your hands there, and acts as a block for the blade to rest into.
Just drive this in.
And with that on, the sled is finished. Using 1/2 inch MDF for the base instead of 1/8 inch really adds some nice weight and durability to the sled. Adding the stop block attachment to the T-track allows you to quickly move and set up for repeated cuts. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.